Okay, welcome to everybody. I'm Jill Omenn, an Associate Director for the M-LEEaD Center. I'm delighted to introduce our colleague and co-chair of this whole program, Michele Cote from Wayne State. She is the Career Development Director for Cures, my counterpart in those roles, and she's an Associate Professor in the Cancer Biology Department of Wayne State. Yours.
Agenda, and I believe what you want to hear from us is not from us per se, but it's from the people that we've brought together to talk about how you can really work to be most successful to launch your own research lab and ultimately your entire research portfolio for the rest of your career. So I am very happy to be here with you today. I absolutely love the Michigan League. It's always gorgeous here. So with that, I think these slides were prepared for you. So I will let you go with the slides.
So first I want to have a shout out to three amazing people. It's Larry Svoboda and Karina Gronlund and Michele Daoud. Also fourth key person who's just here, Maggie Rubens, who's organized that we will have recording of this day's session, audio recording, and we will capture the slides, and all of you who do happen to use slides, to make sure that Maggie has a set for our website and Wayne State website, and other people will be able to benefit, and those of you who want to review what you heard will have a chance to do so. I want to tell you a little background of this session. The idea of focusing on how do you get launched and launched successfully as a new faculty member came from our young people. This is not top down from Rita or Dana or me or Michele, John. We really, listening to our younger colleagues for whom career development is at a critical stage, we're very keen to understand where your focus might be, your anxieties, and I'll tell you how pervasive this problem is. Friday, I was at a program in Washington, D.C. of the American Association for the Advancement of Science, AAAS, and the topic was on science policy, many really big topics, and climate change and the oceans and many other things. But with regard to career development, most of the comments were about how in academia we need to identify an alternative to academic paths and give our young people introductions, internship opportunities, mentoring about a much broader array of career opportunities, all of which is appropriate. But what I commented on was that they were missing a mainstream, which was preparing confidently for an academic career. And it's not appropriate for those in charge to take it for granted that that's sort of a slam dunk, or has been for anybody else. Saturday, we had our big spring commencement here, and I was standing with two friends of mine. One is the president of the university, an MD, PhD, Mark Schlissel, and the other is his former senior faculty member at Berkeley, who is a Nobel laureate, Randy Schekman, and who chairs the Science Advisory Board for our Life Sciences Institute. And I told them about this very workshop, to which each separately and then together replied, "Oh, how I wish I had any kind of advice like that when I was starting." One said, "I spent my first 2-3 years trying to figure out how to do things, how to set up the lab, how to organize to compete for grants. And most of all," they said, "how to select, develop, work with people." So we, turns out, organized this program exactly around those topics. That it's very important to develop your people skills, your communication, your listening, and your capacity to identify talent and potential talent in people younger than you are, because that's the up-and-coming crowd. When you join the faculty, you're in a new status. And it's not the last time mentoring and thoughtfulness about these issues is important. when we discussed this career development function for the center 2 years ago, we went around the table as the whole leadership of the M-LEEaD, and I raised the question whether we ought to do something for mid-level and senior faculty as well as junior faculty. And everybody jumped in, starting with the comment, when I was assistant professor, it was the best of times. Sort of like Charles Dickens, the best of times, because everybody was helpful to me. Reached out, invited me to questions, needed laboratory, samples, whatever. As soon as I got promoted and tenured, that all stopped. And I was expected now to devote my time and effort to helping others, which I'm happy to do, but I need to stay competitive and keep it going. And then one after another, different version of that around the table. So mentoring is a lifelong activity. I can tell you my wife's mother, my mother-in-law, was a student of the mentoring process. She had a PhD in organizational development. He consulted with children's hospitals in LA for many years and elsewhere around North America, including Hawaii. And in her 80s, she published a book called Your Mentoring Mosaic, how you can organize your thinking and your actions to help yourself be doing the things you need to do to mentor yourself and therefore be prepared to mentor others. Earlier, she had published in the Journal of Nursing Administration, we have some nurses here, a typology of mentors, including most memorably the toxic mentor. So it's not a given that mentoring is done well, and it's not a given that it's a productive relationship, but it can be and it should be to the extent feasible. And for those of us organizing centers and departments and other units of universities, it's very important to try to stimulate an environment where effective mentoring and well-received mentoring is true attribute. So there's my introduction. We have a slide here. Can you all make it out? I'm worried about those of you way in the back. This shows the organization of our M-LEEaD Center. We have the facility cores, the research teams. Over here on the right is our career development program, also research and engagement program, pilot projects, very much similar to what you have at Wayne State. And we're proud of the developments and the renewal and the upcoming renewal competition. And we're delighted that Russo, who's our director, is here, and the deputy director, and director designate, and Dolinoy is here. And of course, we'll be putting together our renewal soon, let's say early next year. And we hope to keep going and keep this relationship going. As Michele and I discussed, this is actually, the way we count it, the 4th annual joint event. And we're really keen to keep this going reciprocally in Detroit and in Ann Arbor. So I think, if I've managed the time right, we are right on schedule. And I am thrilled to introduce, as our keynote speaker, Dr. Sue Hammoud. Sue is one of these multiply appointed faculty, of which I am one also, but hers are in human genetics, OBGYN, and urology. And she is a reproductive biologist and genomicist. She does epigenetics, which a lot of you are very interested in epigenetics, epigenomics, and also very detailed molecular developmental biology of the testis. He is a key member of the program we have here under the Michigan Data Sciences Institute called MIDAS, and she is doing single-cell analysis. I'm sure we'll hear something about this, of the path of maturation from spermatogonia all the way to mature sperm. But that's not what we asked her to talk about today, except as it illustrates the launch of her faculty career. And I don't want to steal all her thunder. We're just very proud that she has competed successfully for very notable NIH support and has been recognized already at an early stage of her career as a terrifically novel, innovative investigator, and also a magnet for students and young colleagues. Sue, welcome.
Luckily for you guys, I'm going to spare you this firm talk. Today, first and foremost, I'd like to thank the organizers for giving me the opportunity to present here, but really, I don't think I'm really qualified to give this talk. But I realized as I was going through this, preparing for this presentation, there's so much information out there. Only if I would have read that information before I started my own lab. I'm like 4 years late to the game, but one thing that you do appreciate is that you end up converging like the different routes that you take, but what ends up working is really what's written in textbooks. So that's a little bit reassuring that probably we've done something right. And so the focus today of my talk, of course, is going to be how to make your research team a success and how do you actually sustain a long-term research team and a program going forward. And so, of course, as you guys and everyone here, you're going to be selected one day to become principal investigators based on your science and how exciting your science is and your potential as a scientist. But once you take the keys to your lab space, one thing that you're going to really realize is that, you know, that's probably 1% of the job that you actually do. And there's a lot of management that needs to happen that both you as an individual need to learn. And also you have to train the next generation, which is really exciting, but it's also stressful as a PI when you're first starting because you're going to be molding the next generation, and that's a lot of responsibility. So you must do it right. So just to one of my favorite scientists out there said he had this really amazing quote. I think that really summarizes what a faculty member really is. So he said that you're really hired for your scientific potential and your ability to do science, but really what determines your success, your long-term success as a scientist, is that you have the ability to guide, empower, and have people do the mission that you need them to do. And that's, I think, one of the strongest things in science is that you're pretty much like there as an advocate, really to push your science ideas and really get younger generation to get excited about the work that you're doing and have them share that same goal and that same mission in order for them to be successful and for you to be successful as an individual. So I think training is a two-way process and mentoring is a two-way process. You need to mentor them and they're going to mentor you in indirect ways. And you'll see that I think a lot of the training is going to sort of evolve with time. And so what does it entail to become a PI? I think pretty much strong leadership skills. And the way I see leadership is having a big vision. And you have to have some kind of interpersonal skills where you could be able to communicate with people and rally people to support your vision and actually get the things done that need to get done. And so I think it's really driven by strong leadership and management skills. You need to learn to build a team and manage a team. And this has a lot of challenges, and I'll be touching upon these different points throughout the talk. You need to create an environment where people are able to work and receive and both reciprocate feedback, both to you as an investigator, and you give feedback both to the student as well. And I think this maintains a really healthy dynamic relationship between the professor and the students or the postdocs in the lab. You have to learn how to be a motivator, motivate students and support graduate students in the different career routes they want. Some students don't want to be in academics, others do want to be in academics. And I think you have to learn that mentoring is not one size fits all, and there's things that you learn about throughout this process and how you could actually both support them in their career trajectory, but at the same time, have them accomplish the goals that you need them to accomplish in a certain set period of time. You have to learn to delegate responsibilities, which I think as a junior PI, that's very hard because you believe like you could do it best. And it's hard to see somebody else really take over the work. You have to make fair decisions and manage conflicts. And this is what Gil was pointing out. You have to both be a good communicator, but also a good listener. And I think this becomes really important throughout your career as your lab is growing and progressing. Because you're going to be co-evolving with the students as well, which is a pretty remarkable transition. You have to be a mentor to others, but also you have to seek your own mentorship. I think this is really important for career trajectory and for your personal growth, but also the growth of others around you. Design projects, although you may doubt yourself several times, you actually have to go with your gut feeling, what you think is going to be the most exciting, and you also have to learn to balance your portfolio. You don't want to be doing all these crazy science all the time. You know, this is really exciting. You want high risk, high reward, but at the same time, you need something that's going to give you tenure in 5 years. So you need to balance your portfolio. You're going to have your bread and butter science and your high risk, high reward science. And one thing I think I haven't still even learned yet is to create a budget and balance, but that's something that's ongoing, and hopefully in another 5 years I'll manage that. You learn to write grants and papers, and of course, part of your mentoring, not only in the lab do you teach, but also you have responsibilities. But I think one thing that really comes, the first important fundamental point, I think, as a scientist or as somebody that is starting a lab, is you have to have a vision and you have to have an idea of what you want to accomplish. And one thing I think people get really, starting their lab, they become insecure about, is this vision, good enough? And I think what you have to realize is you have to think big. It's really scary because you have 5 years to prove yourself and you actually need to reach X number of papers to get tenure. But I think, you have to step back and really think about what do you want to be known for in the next 5 or 10 years? And I think that's where your vision comes into play. And then you learn basically how to piecemeal that big vision that you're going to have. And from that vision, then you're going to learn how to balance, like what are some projects that you can do in a certain scope of the field of science that you want to be in, which projects are going to be your guaranteed projects that are going to give you outcomes, going to give you papers to demonstrate, your ability to lead certain projects, because that's going to be important for funding, and also to give credibility to yourself as an independent investigator in the field, basically. And so, but I really tell people is that, and people actually told me this, as a junior PI, this is the only time in your life you could actually take risk. And it's crazy, right? Because you're starting your own lab. You think, oh my gosh, no, I have to be very secure. I have to be very focused. I have to get certain things done. But I think this is the only time in your life when you actually have flexible dollars, meaning you have a startup budget, which is pretty amazing, that it has no strings attached. You've done a chalk talk. You've told people what you're going to do, but you don't really have to do what you presented, which is really amazing. And actually, I'm looking back at my chalk talk. I never really accomplished a single goal from the chalk talk, but it was a good chalk talk, I think. It got me the job. But I think, I've learned to take risks. And this is going to really be helpful for you in the next 5 years of your life. Maybe this high risk project is not going to, be your first thing to come to fruition as you start your new lab, but that's going to be something that's going to sustain you maybe as an associate professor. And that's something I think that people have told me early on. Spend your money and really take risky projects, and also balance your portfolio, which I think is really helpful. But I think once you have these ideas of what you want to do, you get really stressed. You're like, oh my gosh, now I need people to actually come and do the work, and who's going to be doing all this work for me? And the first tendency is that you start to hire people randomly. And I think I've had that mistake, and I think I've learned that never rush to hire anyone until you're 100% sure that this is the right person that you actually want to join your group. Because sometimes you're like, oh, you know what, this person is maybe suboptimal, but I could work with them, I could train them, I'll mold them the way I want them to be. That doesn't work. People are adults. You can't really mold adults and change behaviors. I think, find the right person, because really the first set of hires are really going to determine your lab culture. And it depends on wherever you are. You want to have a certain lab culture going on. You want a culture of people working hard. So obviously you want to pick people that are kind of working hard and are passionate about science. They want to do the same thing. They want to be successful one day. So I think having a lab culture is really important, and it's the people that you first hire are really going to determine that kind of culture that you have. And to be honest, they're going to be the ones that you're either going to succeed or fail as an individual. And so I think, but if you do a mistake, like in my case, you have to realize it really early on, and it's really hard, but fire people. I mean, it's really sad, it's unfortunate, but I think you have to learn how to realize this was a mistake, not a good fit. This person would perform in a better environment, in a different kind of environment, and this is not the right fit for them. So I think you have to come to this realization and have people come to the same realization that this is probably not the right place for them to be. And it's really important, I can't emphasize, that you hire very competent people, because these are the people that when you're busy, they have to be doing work, they have to be reliable. and you have to judge. I think they're your experimentalists, basically. They're doing all these experiments, but at the same time, you have to have people that are going to think on their feet and know what are proper controls and things like that. So I think those are like fundamentally super important. Once you do hire people, I think what's really important is that you actually spend the time to train these individuals. Some of them are very highly skilled coming in. I think working alongside them just to know their habits, their scientific habits, how they do experiments, how they do things. And I think that gives you confidence as an early PI when you need to hand over this data to a project to somebody carry out the work. You could actually develop the trust and say, this is the person that's actually going to get the job done. And so what I usually do is I work with people that are joining my lab for the first 6 months, and I work side by side, and I'm their replica. And I see how well do I replicate their data. I'm like their secondary experimentalist. But I think it develops a relationship with that person. You get to know him on a personal level as well. And then you also get to be more comfortable with the way they do their science. And I think this is fundamentally really important, is that you really need to know your people personally. I know it's really important that as a PI or as a junior PI to have a distance between you and your trainees, whether they're postdocs or graduate students. But I think it's really important that you know them personally as an individual, because I think you have to realize at some point when this person is not performing optimally or his performance has changed, you have to realize that this is not because the individual is bad, it's because there's other circumstances. And I think you have to help them, not only being their scientific mentors, but I think sometimes, students go through challenges and you really need to be there for them to help them go through these challenges and overcome and reach their potential. So I think I'm an advocate of really knowing your students personally and professionally, know what they're going through all the time, and really just helping them become more efficient, more organized in their thinking process. And one thing that I really learned was that mentoring is not a one-size-fits-all. And usually when you hire, you tend to hire the replica of you, which is really great, but it doesn't really create diversity in the workplace. If I have 20 Cs around me, I'd go insane. So I think one thing that you have to realize that, mentoring different people can have very different styles. And it's very challenging for you as a new PI to actually realize that. But I think it's really important that you actually hire people with diverse skill sets. Because that's going to happen, you're going to have somebody that's super creative, maybe not the most productive, but he's really fun to chat with. So that's great. That each person brings in their strengths and weaknesses. Somebody that's super technical, very organized, OCD, that's going to do everything right. These people are going to balance off of each other, but I think you want to have a dynamic lab environment. And that creates challenges for you as a mentor, because you have to realize that. And then you have to say, how do I mentor person X or how do I mentor person Y? And, so mentoring now becomes a very tailored task. And for a junior PI, it's really hard because you're like used to your style and how your mentor mentored you. And so you pretty much want to implement what you learn, and it really doesn't work. And so I think once you realize that these are individuals, and there's so much genetic diversity in individuals, that you really can't implement one strategy, and one strategy that's successful for one person that's going to motivate them or mobilize them to get something done is not going to work with another person. And so really the mentoring style, which is pretty remarkable, usually you think of, it ends up being more like your mentor's style. And you could, as a postdoc, you'd be like, I'm never going to do this way. I'm never going to do it that way. And then you realize you're actually following in their footsteps. So you know what, this is you, and this is your advisor, and you pretty much are like a mirror image of the advisor. So you could choose to either acknowledge that and accept that, or you could probably add in some other modifications that you want to do as an individual. But I think your ultimate goal, what you really need to remember as a mentor, is that it's your role to ultimately guide the individual, champion them, because science is really challenging. There's a lot of ups and downs. These poor kids are doing experiments. And, it's a great idea, but the experiment may not be working. And it's very demoralizing for them coming in week after week. Oh, this is not working. So I think you need to champion them and always be there to support them. And be their advocate and facilitator, because they really rely on you. And they're in a point in their career where they're in this impressionable age, right? So you want to be the right role model for them. and excite them about science and have them love science the same way you love science and have this sort of be carried on to the next generation. And so one way to do this is really by doing one-on-one meetings with each individual. I told you each individual is very differently, so if you try to mentor them in a group, it's really challenging because anything you critique them, it can go, if you try to comment on a behavior or a skill set, it comes to be a critique when there's more than one person around. And so I think I'm a big advocate of having one-on-one meetings where you can talk to the person individually about their different experiments, about the different projects that are working or not working. And it's really important to like praise them when things are working because very soon it's probably not going to work. And so they have this positive reinforcement when they see you, they know they're going to be happy. And they have to trust you and come and be able to come and tell you basically when things don't work or when things go wrong. You know, they have to realize that you're going to be their support system. If an expensive experiment, no matter how costly it is, if it fails, they have to be able to come and confidently come and tell you that this experiment failed because of X, Y, and Z, and this is what I'm going to do to change it. And I think, you know, sometimes when you're a junior PI, it's really hard. Like, what? Like, but you have to hold this back. And I think be there and support them and tell them that it's okay, you know, in science things don't work all the time. And if it does work, then I'd be like worried. And so just have them be positive about the reaction. And so the way we have our one-on-one meetings, and this is just something I've developed personally, is that I have people pre-write their experimental plans and pre-write their protocols before they come and meet with me, and pre-write the big scientific question that they want to address for the week and which experiments they're going to be using and how are they going to use these experiments to address questions X, Y, and Z. What are the limitations of these experiments? And I think this is really important because it makes them put their thoughts on paper before they come in Monday morning. Because they're meeting with me Monday morning, so they send me their research plan Sunday night, so they're not wasting time Monday morning in the lab writing this up, because I have to pre-read it. And it gives them the clarity of their thinking process. And I think what's really important is that it also gives them ownership. They feel like they're controlling their experiments, they're designing their experiments, and they're driving their projects. And I think for them, it's super rewarding that they're capable, they have the ability to drive, and I think it gives them the confidence that they're, you know, competent scientists. And science is something that they can actually handle. Like getting grants is unpredictable, but for them, carrying out an experiment, designing an experiment is something that they could actually achieve. And I think that's really fundamentally important to give them the confidence that they can do the science. And then I think then they could do really good science afterwards. One other thing is that in addition to the one-on-one meetings, we hold regular group meetings. And when I was looking at this in the literature, it's like pretty variable on how people actually do this. Some people do more informal meetings where each person would sit around the table and sort of give you like a weekly update of what they actually did. But for somebody like me that has a very short span attention, I'm probably not going to focus on that. I can't remember what they tell me in 2 minutes, and I zone out 5 to 10% of the conversation. So if this person is presenting for 10 minutes, I've lost most of what he was trying to tell me. So we tend to do more of the formal presentations because even if I zone in and out, I could come back and capture some of the information. And it's also really good practice for them because it teaches them how to actually put a presentation together. It practices public speaking to a group that they know really well. So when they speak outside in public, it becomes something that, you know, it's secondhand nature to them when they speak. And then sometimes we also do once a month joint research meetings. And I think the joint research meetings are great because it puts performance pressure on students indirectly because they have to present outside the group. And they actually feel like they have to get things done because Professor so-and-so is going to see them presenting. And the last thing they want to have is Professor so-and-so see the same exact slides. So I think it's a really good activity. They get more feedback from other people, but it also pushes students really to their potential because students work really well when they know they have deadlines and timelines. And when things have to happen, like committee meetings, they become certainly very productive. You know, so when they have outside expectations because they come to know you as a person, then they're not like, they're accountable. They take deadlines, accountability, but it's not as strong anymore because you're a colleague to them. And so, but when they have an outside person or a second person that's going to be hearing them or judging them, then I think it becomes much more realistic deadlines, and accountability, I think, is a big factor. And one of my favorite things I have is journal clubs, and I love journal clubs because not only do you get to like read up about what's happening in science and all the exciting things that are related or outside of your field, but it's really an opportunity for you to like mold the students indirectly. They start to think exactly like you. You critique a paper, and then that teaches them what is right and what is wrong, what are the limitations of an experiment. And then that indirectly sort of diffuses into their work, because once you teach them how to think and how to interpret pieces of data, then they're going to subconsciously implement that in their own science, in their own work. And it's like passive diffusion science, sort of, where you actually don't have to do a lot of effort, but you tell them what other people did, and then they sort of start following along, like, oh, Sue thinks this. I had an undergrad in the lab that was training another undergrad, and she was setting up a PCR, and she was like, oh, you know what? You have to have positive and a negative control. It's not enough only to have a positive control. And Sue likes controls. And so I was passing through the lab, and I thought that was really funny, and I just ran out from the other side before she saw me. But, you know, I think this is something that you learn how to shape their thinking process just by, you know, having exposure to other people's work. And it also teaches them that they have to be on top of their work. They have to be on top of the field. So there's a lot of different areas. You know, usually I force them, one journal club is going to be something related to spermatogenesis, and the next journal club is nothing related to spermatogenesis, because I get sick and tired of listening about germ cell development. So I want to learn about new things in the field that are happening, new technologies that are evolving. And so it allows them to begin to think outside the box and integrate new technology into your existing science that you're doing today. And they usually have to tell students why they picked this paper, how does this paper potentially can integrate into the work that we do. So I think it allows them to realize that how you could begin bridging two fields together, or bringing outside ideas into the germ cell field. And I think in addition to like all these like formal mentoring, I think you have to have informal meetings with your group where you actually celebrate your successes and their successes. If they get a fellowship, or if they write their first paper, or sometimes we do pizza celebration just for like one mouse that actually worked after 3 different times of injections. We could never get it to function properly. And then our third version of the mouse actually worked. We had a big pizza celebration for that. You know, just celebrate the milestones and what's really valuable to the students. And I think that gives them really a positive attitude, and it keeps them excited about the science that they're actually doing. And because between paper and paper is a really long time in a junior lab, so I think it gives them some kind of gratification going forward. One of the other important features, I think, is having an open communication system with your students. I mean, you have to learn how to communicate with them. And it's not only important that you critique them all the time, and it becomes like negative imprinting if you're like constantly like a parent, your parents telling you what you did wrong, you know, but I think you have to listen to them and how they see their experience with you as a faculty member. So usually we do like annual reviews, and, you know, in the annual reviews, we sort of talk about their like 1-year goal for the lab. And most of the students are super ambitious. They have this really long annual reviews goals, and they never really accomplish that goal. But, you know, they make progress towards that goal, which is great. And I think that's important that people realize that. But you have to teach them, you know, how do you set realistic goals so they're not disappointed when I come back and pull out their previous year's annual review and I go with them, that didn't really happen, that didn't really happen. You know, and so the first annual review, usually I tell them, you know, this is not quite what you expected, but, you know, I think this teaches you for next year how to set your goals realistically and work through them. But what's really important is that I ask them, how did they perceive my mentoring for that year? And I actually listen to them, right? Somebody tells me, Sue, you're too much. You're on top of me all the time. I need space. I need to be able to like think independently. And so I realized that, because as a junior PI, you never realize when it's too much. You're like thinking that you're helping them because you're giving them all this advice and you want them to move faster in their project. But at some time, I think some students find that this is too much, especially the independent thinkers, the creative thinkers. They want to have their space. They want to feel like they're contributing to their project. And so I think, you know, getting feedback from different individuals is really important. And then that teaches you how to modify your mentoring plan for that individual that you're working with. And it's very specific to the individual. Some people like really hands-on training. They like you to like check every single step for them. Others just don't want you to interfere. Just see them once a week and that's good enough. And they'll get their work done. And so, but I think you have to realize which students you can actually afford to do that with, leave them for a whole entire week, and which students you need to check in bi-weekly maybe with them just to make sure that our things are getting done. And so with all of this in mind, I think, you certainly become very overwhelmed because there's so many things that you have to do as a faculty member. So you have to mentor them, you have to drive projects, but at the same time, what you have to really do is to sustain a lab is you have to get funding. And this is pretty variable depending on which institute you go to. So if you go to child health, like my institute, it's like 9th percentile. And that's a traumatizing number to hear, right? So that means if you want to think about it, you have to put in multiple grants to get it funded, or you try to put in one really, really, really good grant and just pray to the gods that it actually goes through. And so what I realized at Michigan is that there's grant workshops, and I'm sure there's grant workshops everywhere you go at every university now, because it's really important for them to get NIH dollars. So take advantage of the workshops that exist on campus. And it was really great because I did the R1 boot camp, and Deneen Wellick, now I could talk about her since she moved from Michigan. She was my boot camp advisor. She's like, that would never fly at NIH. It was very demoralizing, but I think it was a real like sort of advice. She's like, no, this specific aims is never gonna fly at NIH. And then I would give her another specific aims, and she's like, this doesn't look right. And then I was like, okay, this is great. I can't even like come up with a single specific aims page that's gonna work. Luckily, I got the Innovator Award, and I didn't have to worry about that. But I think it really helps to have people that really know the system and know what's realistic and know how things work, because they are sitting on study section and they actually see what people think of like what's feasible. To you, sometimes you don't know how to judge what's like risk. For me, I'm like the type of person that's like risk averse. But when I tell Deneen the experiment I want to do, she would like fall off her chair. She's like, this is never going to work. And so I think you just learn to meet, people halfway and realize what you can and cannot do and what is really achievable, and also how you need to have a lot of data to actually support what you can do. So I think for funding, the advice is apply early and circulate it with a lot of faculty members. So this becomes really important that you actually get to know your colleagues in the department, because, like in any department, there's a large number of colleagues there, and they're going to be the people that you're going to pitch your science to them. And they're going to come and give you a reality check as a junior person, that this seems exciting enough, this is too broad or too narrow, these aims look good. And sometimes, in your department, you may not necessarily have your area of expertise, but that's not necessarily the most important thing, because you're learning how to write a grant and you're learning how to write specific aims. There's a reason they call them specific aims, because they have to be specific. So I think that anyone sort of could give you that judgment, and you don't need to have an expert in your field. But sometimes, like me, I'm very social, so I talk to a lot of people in the germ cell field. I'll call Marianne Handel and say at Jack's Lab, can you please read my specific aims to critique the science, to make sure that, it flies. So you could get a lot of the internal support from people in your department to see, does this look right? Does it sound good? Does this, by NIH standards, meet the standards? And then you could also always have colleagues outside of Michigan or outside of your institution to look at your grants as well for you, just to make sure that, the science looks right from their perspective. And so I think this is where it becomes very important really to have your own mentors. And so some universities, when I signed on my offer letter at Michigan, I was assigned maybe 4 or 5 different mentors potentially to work with. They're like fantastic people, but I've never really chimed with them. So you go out and find your own mentors, right? The people that you feel like you get to talk with, have a cup of coffee, and just socialize, talk your science. And so there's always great people out there. And so I think it doesn't have to be written on paper. But, I have one mentor that's super amazing. We always go once a month. We go out for lunch together, and I update her sort of on what we're doing. And if I have questions, whether scientifically or personally, I tell her, these are the different things that I'm sort of experiencing. What are your thoughts? And, I think just reaching out, trying to find mentors is one of the most important things, because I think this is a lifelong process, and you always need a mentor to learn. And I think what Gil was saying earlier, not all mentors are the same. And some people would really read through your specific aims and really critique you very hard. And those are the people that you actually want. Because you don't want somebody that's going to come tell you, oh, this looks perfect, because it probably doesn't look perfect. I'm like, no, this can't be right. So you want people that are going to be hard, but you're going to learn from them. And I think that's something that you have to learn to appreciate. And you build a thick skin. I think with a lot of rejections, you learn that, this is not so bad. So, and it's important to have your know senior people, but it's also really important to keep your ties with the junior faculty. These are going to be sort of your lifelong colleagues. They're going to be your scientific partners in life, and you could commiserate with them. You could tell them how great or how miserable your condition is, and I think you could learn from them from the very simple things like, obviously you're probably going through similar challenges. And so these junior faculty are going to be more in touch or in tune with what you're experiencing on a day-to-day level. And they may have maybe developed strategies to like overcome what you're feeling or thinking. And so I think that's really important, is to have a lot of junior faculty or junior colleagues that you're really interacting with. And one thing that you always overlook sometimes is the administrative staff. They are like the arms and legs of the institution, of the department, of your lab. Sometimes you think you're so busy, you could just be annoying and like not respond to them or ignore them. But this is the biggest mistake. I think the administrators are there to help you. So really take time to know them personally, befriend them. They're the ones that are going to pick up on the little mistakes that when you're busy writing a grant, you're not going to realize. But they're going to care about you personally, I think. And so I think just always remember to like thank them, be their friend, acknowledge their existence, I think, and they really appreciate that. And of course, as you grow, you have to like both develop yourself scientifically, but you have to develop a reputation. And this is both national and international. And I think those are like natural milestones that you actually have to achieve as a scientist, especially as a principal investigator in the lab. And so one way to begin acquiring national recognition, of course, is to publish papers. People begin to realize your work, then they know who you are. And sometimes you get invited to institutions to give talks. And one advice that I got, never say no to an invitation. And it gets really daunting, but I think it's really important. Pre-tenure, you never want to say no to an invitation that you actually get. Because people appreciate that, appreciate to get to know you personally. And I think it's really important, not only that they know you on a national level, but these are the people that actually sit on study section. And once they know a name, I think associated with R01 file, I think this is really important. And I didn't really realize that until after going through and seeing all these different people at different institutions. Now when I look at study section roster, I'm like, oh, I met this person. Oh, this person knows sort of what I'm talking about. So it's much easier to put your work into the context of you as an individual versus you that they don't know. It's an imaginary you to them in their brain. So I think take every opportunity really to meet people and invite people at your institution to give talks, because these are the people that are going to be sort of your letter writers. I never really did that. So, but some people say that you might want to think 2 years in advance who are going to be your letter writers and start inviting them. I feel like the science should talk for itself, but inviting leaders in the field really is helpful, because you just it's just amazing to learn how they think and how they do their science. And usually when I'm inviting somebody, I'm reading the history of their work from the first time they started the lab to where they are right now. And it gives me, I learned their logic of thinking and how they build science. So for me, it's more of a learning experience of the individual to say, oh, this scientist is super fascinating. And I want to learn how he progressed in his career and the different decisions he's made. And this is the opportunity I get from seminar speakers, as I see their logic of science and how they build things. So I tend to read their oldest papers to their most recent papers and see their progression of their logic. And if you're not invited, I think you could just totally send somebody an email out of the blue and say, hey, I'm going to happen to be visiting Boston. Would you like me to come give a talk in your department? Like they're not paying you anything. I'm sure anybody would love to hear science. So that's another way that, you could actually get yourself known to these people in certain circles. Like, oh, I'm going to be driving through town, or I have family business and I wanted to drop by and give a talk. And I think that's another way that you could potentially boost your CV. So I think just to summarize is really be excited about the work that you're doing, because this is excitement sort of diffuse to the students that you're working with. When they see you excited about a project, they're subconsciously going to become excited about their own work. But if you're like miserable about it, they're not going to be super excited about it either. And what's important, I think, is create a footprint and decide really what is your contribution to science going to be. What do you see yourself? Like when one day they're going to say your name, you're going to be synonymous with what? And I think that has to happen early on in your career. And once you start your lab, you have to find your passion. And then, how are you going to build this contribution? What's going to be your niche? And you want to be unique, because if you're constantly chasing after somebody, somebody's always going to publish before you. So you want to find an area of science that seems to be not very crowded with a lot of HHMI faculty, because otherwise you're going to get swiped off the ground. You're not going to have a chance to compete, but find an area of science that's unique and that's special to you as a person, that you feel like this is where you can make substantial contributions, and work as hard as you can to like really create your own niche. And once you've created your niche, then people are following you rather than you following them. And that's a lot easier, I think, in the long term. Hire and recruit with care, seek advice and mentoring, and take teaching seriously. Because I think teaching and community service, it's a way to give back to the community. So probably you don't want to do it as a first year when you're first starting your lab. But I think as you become more comfortable and sort of realize that you've been a PI for a while and you can handle this, but I think giving back to the community and also inspiring young scientists is really a remarkable process. So all these little fifth graders that you see around one day can be the people that you are sort of recruiting to University of Michigan or to your university of interest. Publish, which I think is everybody knows that, and apply for grants. And you may think like being an assistant professor is like really stressful. There's a lot to do, but people tell me it's the only time they actually have a lot of time on your hands, which is pretty remarkable. So embrace the free time if you do have it, and think creatively. I think this is the only time that you're going to have a lot of time for creativity, supposedly. I don't know, but it seems pretty overwhelming. And so with that, I'll take any questions. I think this is like pretty much sums up academia. So my vision is that I want to one day make sperm in a dish. So that's our long-term goal, is to understand how do you go from hematogonal stem cell divisions, how do you commit entry into meiosis. And so we've been working on this, and I think we've been taking it one step at a time. So we do a lot of single-cell genomics to understand the normal developmental program, and then are trying right now to recapitulate this program in vitro. Yes. They make both somatic cells and germ cells in the dish. There is a lot of, there's a lot of documentation. I was really nice. I didn't really fire them. I found them another job. So I was like, my friend has a genetics company. This person was very bright, but I think he told me one thing early on that like sort of gave me red flags. Why should I work hard for your success? And he was, came from a very prestigious lab, had very beautiful papers, but wasn't very successful in getting a faculty position. And I think it was a very hard transition for him to come in as a senior. And I was much younger than him. So I think that like really tipped him off, and he told me, why should I work hard for your success? And I knew he was really smart and very capable, because obviously I was super excited when I was interviewing him. And he's actually doing really well in industry. So I think he's thriving. This is because he's getting paid much better. He's like the boss and for what he's leading, and he's really excited. So I found him another job. But there is a process. I think there's like the HR at Michigan I did a lot of documentation initially, but didn't end up like literally firing him. I found him. So I think that's really challenging. But what I do tell them is to graduate from my lab, you have to have 2 papers. So that's the milestone that you need to achieve. You're probably not going to get this person to produce 5 papers, but you're going to make him produce 2 papers. That's going to give them enough to graduate from your lab. And those two papers, you determine the scope, right? You determine the trigger of when this paper is sufficient enough to go out for review. And they know that you control that decision. So I think people that are like, realize probably the first 2 years, if they're not motivated, they're not going to get motivated. Fourth and fifth year, when they start seeing their colleagues like sort of moving along the line, that's when they get their like act together, I feel. And start actually becoming more productive and realizing that they have to reach this like lab expectation. And I think you have to set it in stone that 2 papers to get out a PhD. So you're here to get a PhD to go do something else, but you have to be able to get a PhD first. And I think just setting those expectations, and those are the people that I tend to meet with more frequently because they have to have accountability. Yeah, that's why I think I feel like I'm in the lab a lot. I do a lot of my PI job at night. It does take a lot of time. But what I really emphasize to people is that it's not about like, I don't want 5 different results at the end of the week. I want 2 results that are going to be reliable enough for me to go to bed, not having to worry and think about it multiple times. So I'm more of an experimental readout person rather than a times. So I think once they know that, then they're not like super stressed to do 500 other things in particular. So I think when you give them realistic output for what they need to achieve on a weekly basis, I think this relaxes them as a student and allows them more to focus. And also the pre-write-ups. So the pre-write-ups has all their controls, the question they're asking, why are they doing this experiment, what they're hoping to achieve from this experiment, actually gives them the mental exercise that they need to think about before they come and meet with me. And also they're writing this up so there's no way to screw it up on the bench because it's already pre-typed and they're using that protocol next to them when they're executing the experiment. I feel it works. Some students find it overwhelming and daunting and they rotate and they never come back. But that's the style I feel that works for me and that's the style that works in my lab.
Well, as you can see, it really exudes passion for the science and also for the role of a faculty member. It's really impressive and wonderful that you put as much thought and effort into organizing this presentation for everybody's benefit. And, there's so many different levels. There were several points at the very end about students, even undergraduate students. Mostly it's about graduate students. It's also about technicians and scientists, senior scientists in the lab. It's a complex environment. And there are different roles, different expectations, and a lot of different personalities. As the lab gets bigger, it gets even more complex. So this is a perfect introduction for our first panel, which is going to be about the people management and people decisions. We've heard really personalized examples from Sue, and I think many of you immediately resonate with some of these decisions. It's also more, it's one thing with students. With graduate students, we have an organized process. I'm sure it's the same at Wayne State. You have rotations. So a student comes to your lab with first interest. You have a chance to see how they quickly they learn the system of the lab and seem capable and excited about the goals. And sometimes it's just not a good fit. And they can go on to another rotation and hopefully find something that works better for them and for the mentor. But with employees, as opposed to students, you come under a lot of other rules. And you have to make decisions timely. You have to keep records. Record keeping, a lot of people complain about paperwork. But think how many times Sue mentioned writing out the protocols and the goals of the project for that week and for that project. A lot of labs don't do that. And people, so they start an experiment, they try some things, and when it's done, you don't even know exactly what you did, what they did. And that's a very disorderly laboratory. It's a sign of potential difficulties for the whole lab, actually. So, without taking more time, Karina and Laurie, please come up and lead us for the first panel. Okay. Yes, the panelists are essential. All right, but I'll let you introduce the panel.
Good morning, everyone. I think I'm one of the only ones who has slides, right? John, do you have slides? Okay. And I also have a very specific topic. But before I begin, I'd like to, can everyone hear me? This is short, this is really tall. I'd like to thank both Wayne State and the Cure Center and the M-LEEaD Center for organizing this 4th annual career development event. It's one of the first ones I've been able to attend, so I'm really be here. About a year ago, almost to the day, I was, it wasn't quite warm here in Michigan yet, and I was out in California at a meeting, and the postdoc representatives from the Society of Toxicology sent me an email asking me if I could talk about a very specific subject. It was on de-energizing or negative relationships in science. And I was sitting out there in the California sun, and I think I was completely overwhelmed by the flowers and everything that were happening out there. And I said yes. And then I began to panic because they wrote back and said they needed an abstract in like 24 hours for that. And then I remembered that one of the things that Sue talked about today was establishing your network of junior professors that start with you. But I was able to extend back to my network to undergraduate. And remember that my college roommate, Alex Gerbasi, was the worldwide leader in jerks. She's a PhD in sociology and a professor at Exeter University. She works here with people at the Michigan Law School of Business. So you may have heard about some of this, seen some of these nice press releases on jerks. So I asked her if she'd let me see some of her recent abstracts on this topic. And lo and behold, there were some data. And as scientists, we're clinging to data, right? I didn't want to get up there at the Society of Toxicology and sort of dredge through my negative relationships in science, although I haven't had any, of course, right? But instead, we're relying on some data. So for all of you here today, I'd like to just take a few moments to think. When you probably saw this topic, you thought about some things that might have gone wrong, right, in relationships that you have in the lab or with colleagues. But remember that to be great scientists, conflict is part of our everyday work. To move science forward, we don't want to think only about ourselves and our vision, but also get ideas from those around us. And sometimes those ideas aren't ones that we're prepared to hear. So knowing that conflict is an everyday part of science, we do know that there are negative relationships that develop in organizations. And the data that Alex shared with me suggested that about 7% of our relationships in organizations are negative. And you can see here in this network that the types of what they call de-energizing relationships have enormous impacts not only on the individuals involved in those relationships, but on the other individuals in these networks. And that this research shows that interactions with a colleague has between 4 to 7 times the influence of the energizing interactions. So these are the types of things that you think about on your commute home, you think about when you're trying to go to bed. This is a very small percentage of what happens to you during the day, but creates a large amount of space in your brain. And what Alex used as a metaphor for these de-energizing relationships are, for those of us who are fond of Harry Potter, are the dementors. And so what effects do these dementoring relationships have on the workplace? And so let's take a survey. We have nowhere near 25,000 people in this room, but Alex conducted a survey of 25,000 people. What percentage of them do you think experienced toxic behavior at work? Raise your, yeah. Okay, let's raise it. Above 50%? 75%? 95%? 99%? Bill says everyone, but you are close. Over 98%. But what percentage of these people do you think intentionally treat people rudely? Is it 50%? 25%? Sue is saying less. Less than 5%. And so you can see the great diversity of variability here between how we experience toxic behavior and the intention of toxic behavior. But nonetheless, there are huge implications of this behavior. So 80% of people lost time worrying about the incidents. This is something that happens to me a lot. I spend a lot of time thinking about what happened and what to do to change it in the future. 78% said that their commitment to the organization declined. So for example, in the lab, this could be something like you have a negative relationship with another graduate student when you're rotating. You may decide not to stay in that lab, even if it has nothing to do with the PI. You see decreases in performance. You see lost time because you're trying to avoid interacting with the offender. You can spend less time at work. Your quality of work can decrease. You can become a dementor yourself and take the frustration out on your peers. You can even leave the academic workspace. What is also known about these data is that the implications are worse when it comes from the top. So that means when the offending relationship comes from a PI or from someone who has a supervisory relationship over another person. They're also more toxic when they cross boundaries between teams. So crossing between two labs or crossing between two departments. And so this has a disproportionate effect on trainees. There can be impacts on the quality of life, lower performance, not only by the individual, but by the team, and the increased likelihood to exit. And for any of you who have been involved in these types of dementor relationships, you know that others get sucked into the fray. It never remains just between the two individuals. And this can have impacting effects outside of the individuals. So how do people become dementors? You can think perhaps a little bit about your own experience. Sometimes people just aren't well trained to be managers. That's one of the reasons why we're here today. We also know, and as Sue alluded to, we have increasing demands on our time, not only as you go up the ladder, but as we change the types of technology. And some people are just born to be more apt to conflict than others. So now I have two quick examples of individuals in science and experiences that happen to them. So first we'll talk about Jack. Jack is a longstanding member of a research and development team in a global toxicology firm. When Alex and her colleagues surveyed the team annually for 6 years, they found that in the first 5 years, Jack was considered an exemplary colleague. Many saw him as an energizer, the go-to person for information. But when they visited the organization a year later, they found that over half of his colleagues viewed him as a neutral influence at best and a de-energizing influence at worst. Shortly thereafter, Jack left the organization. And when they talked to his manager and colleagues, they found that Jack had lost interest in his job, his overall level of engagement with the team had plummeted, and several employees who relied upon him also saw a drop in their performance and job satisfaction. To contrast that with Pauline, we're moving to academia. Those of you who are involved in the Society of Toxicology know that they like to have different examples across academic, government, and industry examples. So Pauline is a tenured associate professor of environmental health at a large research university. 6 months prior to Alex's team's visit, Pauline was promoted to the associate dean for research. It was her first major administrative position. In her role as a researcher, she was well respected, helping solve mechanistic toxicology questions. In her new role, she coordinated the research administration of 200 faculty, 1,000 graduate students, and over 100 staff, as well as her own laboratory of 10 graduate students, staff and fellow. The survey revealed that rather than Pauline being a motivating force, she was often a source of demotivation by the members of her school and the lab. It became apparent that while Pauline was an excellent toxicologist, her lack of managerial experience contributed to the inability to coordinate and unify the school or lab. Fortunately, Pauline has a dean who recognized this situation, and he recommended leadership training and assigned Pauline a mentor. So when Alex and her team returned to do a follow-up visit 6 months later, people saw in Pauline as an energizing and a motivator, and it showed. Her lab had just published in Environmental Health Perspectives and received a new center grant from NIEHS. So what can we learn from these two simple cases? First, people who are considered de-energizers by colleagues are not always considered that way. For Jack, he lost interest, perhaps due to negative data. This is one of the things that Sue alluded to. Sometimes when students are doing well or when researchers are doing well, you need to praise them because it's not always going to be that way. Oftentimes we hit snags in the road. And for Pauline, it was finding herself in a position for which she didn't have the skills and experience in time management practices. And we also learned that the negative effects were not confined. The effects affected others around them, not only Jack and Pauline. But they had different outcomes, and this was due to intervention by the dean or a mentor for Pauline, in which Jack did not have the opportunity. So what are the things that we as leaders or PIs can do to improve situations in our lab? So one of the things that is important to do is promote the well-being of your employees and trainees. And you need to model this behavior yourself. Having good work-life balance. Also doing these, the second bullet there, the 360 anonymous feedback. This is one of these type of yearly assessment tools that many people find to be helpful. The second thing that you can do is improve the networks of your employees and trainees. One of the things that you need to do is take your trainees to societies, to meetings, introduce them around, even events like today. Make sure that we're meeting new people across the board. And how can you as an individual handle negative relationships? One of the things you can try to do is build up your energy and re-engage, find people around you and help develop new skills. You can also try to avoid a negative relationship by working around them, reduce your reliance on them. This is not always completely effective. Sometimes you need to reach out and ask for help. And then it's really important to not only build your science-based, but also build your personal-based networks. So you have individuals that you can talk to about these things that are happening in the workplace. I often found that another great example of where you can build your network, but not necessarily a physical network, is through a well-curated Twitter account. And I know there are a few of you in this room that are sort of active on Twitter, like I am. And you are able to connect with other academicians at different institutions and see how they do things. And this is an example of a number of tweets that came out in that January, February timeframe when we have the doctoral day for the students who are admissible to doctoral programs, where they come to campus. And you can talk about it's grad school visit season, and these are students talking to each other. And how do you take advantage of this one day that you get to come to campus and meet many potential mentors? And how do you detect a toxic tormentor? So I was very impressed that a toxic tormentor is very similar to Alex's metaphor of a dementor. So one of the things that you shouldn't do is become a dementor yourself. And there's a sweet dog. When I gave this talk at the Society of Toxicology, I was the third, and we all had dogs in our slides. And I asked Alex what this dog was doing here because I had an example slide set, and she said people just like dogs. They like to look at puppies, but what they know is that you don't want to talk. You don't want to be a jerk, because even dogs can detect jerks, and people will avoid and dislike you. So don't be a jerk. And with that, I'd just like to thank you. And these are the references to Alex's work if anyone's interested in learning a little bit more about the actual sociology of being a jerk in the workplace. So thank you.
Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. I'd like to introduce, we're going to start panel 2, which is talking about physical resources, in other words, the resources that you have in physically setting up your lab, ordering equipment, and that type of thing. And our moderator will be Dr. Michele Cote. She's the co-leader for career development through the CURES program at Wayne State. And she's also an associate professor, an associate center director for education at the Cancer Institute. Welcome.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you for the introduction. You can see our panelists are ready to go up here. We've got just a brief bio of everybody, and I think the morning session worked well, where we'll let each of the panelists speak for about 10 minutes, and then we will kind of hold questions for the end. Unless you've got something that you're just burning and dying to ask, we'll try to stay with that format. So without further ado, we're going to start with Dr. Paul Jenkins. He is an assistant professor of pharmacology and psychiatry here at the University of Michigan.
All right, thank you for the introduction and for the opportunity to speak to you guys today. I just wanted to start with a general understanding and an idea of what it takes to get a lab started in terms of, you get to your new lab, and most people haven't seen a lab like this. It's a big empty room, and you have a checkbook, and you have to turn it into a fully functioning laboratory. And it's a bit of a challenge at the beginning because you're like a kid in a candy store, and you've got this startup package, and you're trying to figure out what are the things that I need to get the lab started. And so one of the things that I like to recommend to people, especially postdocs that are in an already functioning lab, presumably, is to actually start now planning for getting your lab open. So, for example, you might get ready to start doing an experiment, and you put your samples in this centrifuge, and then you go use this piece of equipment, and you just take these things for granted because you do it all day, every day. Take pictures of everything. Take pictures of the way it's set up. Take pictures of the catalog numbers of the items that you're trying to set up. I had a huge spreadsheet of items that I brought with me to start my own lab, because going from this empty space to having something that's running takes, knowing which equipment that you need to buy. On top of this, you actually have to prioritize the equipment that you need to purchase versus the stuff that you can sort of scrimp and scrounge around for. So, for example, my lab does a lot of microscopy and a lot of protein biochemistry. So those were the things that I knew I needed to have, needed to be new equipment that was going to last for a long time, versus some of the other things that we might dabble in, you might be able to use a core facility for. Or another great source of things is labs that are winding down. So I was able to get a lot of equipment, stir plates and things like this that, you can use for decades from labs that were closing up shop. And so I probably got $200,000 worth of stuff for free from a couple of labs that were shut. So I think at the beginning, it's really identifying that key piece of equipment or several key pieces of equipment. If you're an electrophysiology lab, having patch clamp rigs is going to be key. You need shiny, new, well-functioning equipment. But in other areas, you might be able to get some of these used items. There are places online where you can get sort of eBay for scientific equipment, where you can get refurbished or used equipment at a pretty significant discount. The other thing that I think a lot of people don't know when they start is you will be every scientific rep's best friend in the world until you place that first order. So use that to your advantage. I'm a terrible negotiator. When they asked me if I wanted a job here, I said, yes, before I even looked at what the letter said in it. But when it came down to ordering scientific equipment, I ground on these companies. I pitted them against each other, because they will give you lots of free things in order to get that first order from their company. So, Fisher was going to give me this. I don't know, VWR. I was going to place my order with them, but, maybe you can give me a whole freezer full of racks, or you can give me this percentage off, and just really, really pound on these guys until they give you the best deal, because they're going to swear up and down that they're going to be around, they're going to provide you support and resources, and that first order goes in and they move on to the next new PO. So that is really a key opportunity to place this big order, because you can get pretty significant discounts with your first order, and some of the companies will even extend that discount for the first year of the lab being open in some of these. So in terms of getting started, I think those were two really helpful points. And then I'd like to leave time at the end for lots of discussion, so I'm not going to talk too long. But one thing I want to do, apologize in advance for, is I do have to step out a few minutes early, because I'm not giving a talk about time management today, as you can tell. I have a prelim that I have to sit on at 2 o'clock, so hopefully we'll have lots of time for discussion and then answer some questions then.
Okay, so I wanted to talk about something a little bit different, which is utilizing core facilities. I came into the core sort of backwards. I was actually tenured and had an active research program that utilized protein biochemistry. And my boss said, you can do protein biochemistry. We need a proteomics core. Will you make one for us? And so I knew I needed mass spectrometry. I accepted that challenge. And then I liked it so much that I got lost in it. So that's where I am today. So I am lost today. Happily, though. So utilizing core facilities. So I had 5 points I wanted to bring up. Change is constant. When you're using cores, do try to integrate if it's appropriate. Look outside before you, in data repositories, before you put a huge effort into your experiment. Know how to finish your experiments, and then really do the experiment. Okay, and I'll explain each of those a little bit. Okay. I run a proteomics core. High-end mass spectrometry is changing. So I say the generation time is about 18 months. So if you're focused on your biology, I'm sorry, you're not going to keep up with it. The people in the cores have to keep up with it. So utilize their experience and expertise. So in order to do this quickly, fastly, you have to have the base. So how many years of experience in a high-end analytical technique does it take before you can accumulate, assimilate, and utilize the latest technology, the latest approach, the latest reagents, the latest software that's come online? It takes a lot. So these are valuable resources, and they're available to you. Always define your question. There are so many approaches, and if you ask me how we can look at something in the proteomics world, I could give you 3 to 5 different approaches. And the one that would be optimal for you requires me to know what your question really is. And then finally, newer doesn't always mean better. Just because a new approach has come online, you may be best with a solid, worked out, pretty boring approach. Don't be afraid to use it just because it's not new. Integrate. So some of the best work that has come out of the core facility that I'm director of has been done when somebody comes into the core. I've had students, I've had techs, I've had postdocs that spend 3, 6, 12 months actually working about 60% of their time in the core. And they really push their projects. They own the project. They learn a lot from us. We learn from them. And if the cores will allow you to do this, put your person in the core. You'll get a lot more out of it. So collaboration, if the core people contribute to the science, then it's a collaboration. Okay. If they take a sample, put it in the instrument, and send you the data back, then it's not. Right? When collaboration is appropriate, then embrace it and acknowledge that that's what it is. Okay? When you preview a previous experiment, it's always appropriate to say, if you want to know how things are going to turn out, not how the experiment is, what the answer to the experiment is going to be, what the data is going to look like. If you're talking to somebody in the core, hey, can I see somebody's work that has done this before? Okay, pretty much they should be able to show you something. And it doesn't even have to come from their core, because there are data repositories out there that have literally any kind of experiment you want to look at. And you can see what your data set should look like, and so you can get an understanding of what you're going to have to do to analyze it. You have to pay core facilities. I can't tell you how many people have come up and asked to collaborate. It doesn't work that way. We all have to contribute to the support, and it's recognizing that it's valuable with money as well as your recognition. Check data repositories. Okay, if you want to publish in a proteomics journal, you have to submit your data. You have to put it in a publicly available repository and allow the community to look at it. Right? Search for your experiment. It would be very unusual if there's not something out there that's close to what you're going to do. If you can look at data already before putting in a lot of effort, you're going to design a better experiment. Okay, you're going to know what the data is going to look like if you do this type of experiment. You're going to say, that's not really what I wanted to see. Can we design it a different way? Can we use a different model? Okay, and that helps you to redefine your question. And then finally, for this, are more advanced techniques appropriate? Because I'm not kidding, the field changes every year, every 2 years. There are more things coming on board. And so an experiment that was done 4 years ago and is in the repositories for 2 years is not necessarily got the cutting edge work in it. Okay, I want to talk about something that we've done in exosomes. Okay, these are, because this was done completely with data from repositories. Exosomes are vesicles. They have proteins, they have microRNAs. They mediate biological actions. They're defined as much by their size as by their protein content. They're small, 30 to 150 nanometers in diameter. Some of the protein content that defines them are the tetraspanins, such as CD9, CD81. This is an available resource, the Human Protein Atlas. Okay, I wanted to see what proteins, the distribution of the proteins that have been defined in exosomes were. So I went to the atlas, and I looked up the top dozen, and there wasn't any pattern. So this tells me that exosomal proteins come from all over the cell. Next, I wanted to define what was in vesicles. So I went to Catherine Lilly's work, and she has defined the organelle structure, proteome, by some pretty hardcore differential centrifugation and analysis. So we downloaded her data, and if you see circled in red, she actually made it easy. She put in an R script so that you can work with her data. And all her data is online. So if I want to look at anything about vesicles and cells, I can do it with her data. Next, we looked at that and did a different transformation of that data, the TSNE, T-distributed stochastic neighbor embedding, and this was done by Nick Carruthers in the lab. Okay? So he took her data, did another manipulation of it to get a better definition for us of what was in the different organelles. And then we went to a different paper that's been cited over 500 times now, that defined what was in vesicles. And we overlaid that on Catherine Lilly's data on her map, right? And so here we were able to define what was in a good exosome preparation. All of this was done with publicly available data. Then we took our own exosome preps and we overlaid it too to define how ours look compared to that. But I'm not going to show you that. They weren't quite that good. All right. Data's out there. Utilize it. Okay. Know how to finish. So if I can't tell you how many times people come to me years later and say, we did this experiment and you generate all this data, but we never really did anything with it because we didn't know what to do. Okay. The biggest one was like a 5-year gap, and it was great data. I mean, it was really clear-cut data. but they just didn't know what to do with it. They let it sit. So these data sets can be intimidating. What are you going to do? You're going to make heat maps, do PCA, principal component analysis, ingenuity pathway analysis. The thing that we've been doing with a lot of these in the lab now is Piano, platform for integrative analysis of omic data. How are you going to handle the data? Know that before you do your experiment, okay? And often there are multiple algorithms for the same type of question, and I'll show you for IP analysis in a minute. So you have to know if your algorithm requires a certain construction of the experiment before you do that. And for anybody that works with data, R is the language of proteomics. Have people in your lab learn this language, use this language, and consider it yourself too. Okay, this is 3 different software platforms for analysis of immunoprecipitation MS data. Significance analysis of the interactome. This was Alexei Nizhitsky's program, so he's right here at U of M now. Sphinx, straightforward filtering index, and finally affinity enrichment of mass spectrometry. You can use any of them, all right? But know what you're going to do with your data. The thing that's constant about all of them is you need a good background. And so you have to build that into your experimental model. Okay, we'll skip that one. And finally, do the experiment. A single data point tells you nothing. Okay? And yet, maybe it's because of the expense, maybe it's because of conservative approach, I don't know. How often I get, I just want to look at one. I just want to see if I can see something in this one. And it doesn't work like that. You get information, but you can't do anything with it. So plan and execute a complete set of experiments. You know, if I'm doing an exposure, I do exposure every Tuesday, okay? I collect the data, I work on it. So I'll plan. I need 4 of these. So 4 weeks in a row on Tuesday, I do an exposure, I collect the data, I process it, and I know that I'm going to do that full set. It decreases time, honestly, because if you bring in a sample and you have to wait 2 to 3 weeks, well, then you bring in another sample and you have to wait 2 to 3 weeks. This just extends forever. You save time and you decrease the variability by doing it as a single experiment. And publishing will require that you have that. You can't publish them in 1 or 2, sometimes not 3. Excuse me. So finally, and this is the bane of all core facilities, cite the core. It really is to everybody's benefit. And because I don't do anything myself very much, these are the people that actually do the work. So Nami Shin, who has been with me for 15 years, and if she decides to leave, I think I have to leave also. Joe Caruso, Nick Carruthers is the informatician who did the work I showed you. And Al Rosenspire. This is a project that's embedded in the core. Okay? He has an R01. The work we do in the core is about 50% of his R01. He puts his technicians in the core. We work with them. We supervise them. It is a really productive relationship. Okay.
Please take your seats. We're ready to move along to our next phase of the symposium. You know, we're enjoying talking to each other so much. We're trying to get back to our schedule here, but it'll be a fun panel. Next, we have panel 3, competing for a ladder of funding. Lori and I are moderating this one again,
And this time we have Kyun Park, who's an associate professor of epidemiology and environmental health sciences. Melissa Runge-Morris, professor of environmental health sciences and pharmacology. And Maureen Sartor, who's associate professor of computational medicine and bioinformatics and of biostatistics. And so, Kyun, I think you get to start. Do you have slides? Great, thank you.
All right, so good afternoon, and I'm Kyun Park. I'm very pleased to share my, my grant funding and my experience. And so I think I have been invited to this panel because I recently received two out of one almost at the same time. So this is an example of success. But on the other hand, that means that I'm a good example of failure. I have been, failed many times before I finally succeed. So hopefully this could be a good thing that share with you. And so this is my grant history, and as you can see, so the font is a little small, but I graduated 2006, and then I started my postdoc 2006 July, and then at the time my advisor, my mentor, recommended me that Song, you need to be independent. So that's why don't you write your own grant? So that's why that was a very good recommendation, and then advice, and I tried to find what kind of grant I can apply as a PI. And at that time, at the University of Michigan School of Public Health, NIOSH, ERC, have a funding. Even doctoral student and postdoc can be the PI. So that's why I take a shot, and I got my first grant as the PI, which was a foundation of my next grant. So I could generate the preliminary data that was used in my first K01 grant. So I tried my K grant around 2007, but as you may expect, so I also my first try wasn't successful, but I tried to respond to my comment, and then I resubmit. So as you can see, that is June 7, 07, so 2007, and then the resubmission happened March 08. So in between, so typically you can imagine that's how long it would take this grant review process. So I immediately responded, and then have a conversation with my program officer, and then what happened, and then what was the kind of negative the comment in my grant, and then I tried to address that issue. And so that's why that took about the 9 months, and then after this resubmission, it was successful, and then I got my first NIH grant, which was K01, so late 2008. So that's why I could start my first this K01 starting from 2009. So in between, so I was promoted to research assistant professor because I was expected to receive this grant. So the department was generously offered this research assistant professor position. And then using this K grant, I was able to also start my tenure track faculty position here in the epidemiology department. But you can see that here a big space here, because during that time my mentor left, and then I became a kind of orphan, and then I tried to find another mentor, and then how can I succeed in the next step, and then so that's why that it took time, and then I stumbled couple of times, and then I find this M-LEEaD pilot grant, which was also another good foundation for my the next R01 grant. But as you can see here, so first R01, 2013 October, and then it failed. And then 14 July, resubmission, it failed. And then, so here is, you can see the first R1. So my first R1, I tried 3 times. So, and then finally, that third time submission was successful, and then I got that grant. But in the meantime, I tried another R1 grant, and then that was also first time fail. And then the second time, I got the good score. So that's why these 2 R1 grant at the same time were awarded, and then so that's why I was able to start this 2 R1 at the same time, 2016, and then it will be until 2021. And then using this successful R1 grant, and I was promoted to the associate professor 2017. So, but anyway, so as you can see, so I'm a kind of example of this failure, success all the time. And then even this, the first R1 grant, starting from this 2012 FOA, and then based on this FOA, I started communication with the PO, and the first submission failed, contact PO again, and the second submission failed, contact PO again, and the third submission, and then finally I got this funding. So just as you can see, so not always your resubmission will give you a better score. So as you can see, the first submission, I was kind of borderline, so 21% is not actually too bad, but it wasn't, in the funding range. But even though I tried to address all the commands, my second submission, as you can see, the score even higher, and then the percentile is even much higher because you are not getting the same reviewer, even though you try to address all the commands. So that's why you may not know who will be your reviewer even in your resubmission. So then if your reviewer who didn't review your application before didn't like your application, then that person kill your application as well. But luckily I was able to address all this issue. That's why in my third try, so I got this grant within the funding range. So the last slide, to me, I think the best, so most important lesson I learned is try to find the right funding mechanism at the right stage. So if you are a postdoc, then you should find the right funding that can support you. And then after you graduate and then before you start your tenure track, probably this career development grant might be the right grant mechanism. And then after that, you build on, and then eventually you can try, and you can be competitive for the R1 grant. You should take advantage of your mentor, and then you should communicate very well, but you also need to be sure that you should be independent of your mentor. Otherwise, your application, you are not showing the right evidence to you are an independent researcher out of your previous mentor. So you need to also want to seek for the seed funding, so pilot project, to provide convincing evidence of feasibility. I think the feasibility is a very important factor when you write your grant, and then significance and innovation if you pursue a new idea. Plan ahead and prepare well before submission. I think this is another important factor before you become a successful the grantee, because it will be a very long time to build a strong interdisciplinary research team and then make collaboration record. To me, I think it was very helpful to have a conversation with the PO before I submit, because even though you get a pink sheet and summary statement, that statement doesn't give you some nuances and then what's happening during the study section. So you can learn about that from your PO right after you receive the summary statement. And then try to find this NIH, so what NIEHS is and is not interesting. And another thing that I learned from PO is that, so my PO gave me that, so there is, this type of NIEHS workshop. And then, because that workshop was very relevant to my next grant, so I tried to submit my abstract, and then that was selected, and then I was invited as a speaker. And then that made me visible to other investigators and the scientists, and then I think that was very helpful when I submit my new grant, which included some novel idea, and then the person who were in that workshop recognized me, and then they even understand my approach earlier before they eventually evaluate my application. And then ask many people to read your proposal, because I also start attending this study section, and then I realized, oh, not always. So I'm an epidemiologist. So my application is epidemiologic application proposal, but not always epidemiologists read and review your application. So that's why before you submit your application, it is very important to receive some feedback from non-epidemiologists if your application is epi study. And finally, so never give up. Okay. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Melissa Runge-Morris. I'm the director of the Institute of Environmental Health Sciences at Wayne State University. I wanted to especially thank everyone here for inviting us to participate today. Michele and John and Gil, Rita and Donna made us feel very welcome and very excited to be a part of this, because I was telling people at my table every year I learn something new, just along with all of you. You know, we have your sister P30 Environmental Health Sciences Center at Wayne State, called the Center for Urban Responses to Environmental Stressors, the CURE Center. And because we have a good relationship with our colleagues at the University of Michigan, we've been able to grow and mature as a center and ask new questions, hopefully making a positive impact on the field. You know, I already said I'm an institute director. I'm a physician scientist, really. Did somebody write PhD up there? Thank you very much. I'm an MD, and I graduated from the University of Michigan in 1979. And so I learned through my medical career and also being an oncologist, I still see patients at Carmanos Cancer Institute, that the holy grail in the environmental health sciences field is really asking questions about how cancers and other chronic diseases develop in the first place. So environmental health really is where it's at. And because I'm an MD, I'm not a PhD, I've had to learn by necessity how to work across disciplines and get productive teams together to ask tough questions, push the envelope in our field. And that's another thing. An institute? What's an institute? You know, an institute is designed, at least at Wayne State, to push boundaries and to be more edgy than maybe your traditional department. So one way to do that is to get teams together to tackle challenging questions in our field, like the case with the CURE Center, the P30 that we have, but also other team science-oriented activities. Because, you know, by definition, environmental health sciences, what is it? It is understanding the physical environment, what's bioavailable to us, what's happening in our genome, and exposure science makeup, and then what are the disease outcomes that we can expect during the life course. So all of those questions involve the integration across disciplines. So one thing that might pertain to you guys is, well, what are opportunities for someone emerging in your field? You're a new assistant professor, you're looking toward the development of your career. We talked a lot about your own personal laboratory development, but what does team science have to offer to you? Well, this past December, colleagues from Wayne State got together with people at the University of Michigan, including Rita and her team, Michigan State, Oakland University, Henry Ford Health System, University of Gothenburg in Sweden, and we decided to put together what they call a Superfund research program application. I don't know if you heard about those, but that really integrates the big facets of environmental health. Your working with engineers on the physical environment, and then with biomedical scientists to understand the dynamic between physical world, real world environmental exposure and health outcomes. And the problem we are tackling is the high preterm birth rate in Detroit. Did you realize that Detroit has the highest preterm birth rate among 100 American cities? And this just came out last year as an update from the March of Dimes. And it's a shocking problem that has the need for intensive research in that field. So our colleagues assembled a large team to address this question. And if you ever go to a Superfund research program meeting, the cool aspect about it is all the presentations there are from trainees and junior colleagues in the field. And that stands apart in my mind to what you see at your typical science meeting, professional society meeting. So we called our center the Center for Leadership in Environmental Awareness and Research, because the idea there, look how many years it took me to get where I am. The idea there is to train junior faculty and trainees to be leaders in their field early on. You don't want to wait 30, 35 years to get that leadership chance. You want to work smart and actually be the next tier of leadership in your department, your institute, in your field. So we have put together proposals that 2 engineering projects and 3 biomedical projects, and they're all led by early stage investigators, and we're very proud of that. So we're hoping to give more opportunity through this mechanism to the next generation of leaders in environmental health sciences. You know who that is. Take the mirror out. It's you guys. So questions are welcome. Thank you.
I'm Maureen Sartor. Well, they already introduced me. So I'll say a little bit about the experience of getting my first R01 and then some tips for you, but I wanted to start with this. Some of you may have already seen a Venn diagram like this. But the middle of this is what you want to really aim for your first big grant, right? You want to first do something that interests you, otherwise, you don't have the curiosity and motivation to carry you through to the end. Of course, you want to target what NIH wants to fund, but also what reviewers tend to find interesting. And that's not necessarily always the same thing. And then also what unique resource you have here at Michigan or Wayne State, and what unique skills you have to offer. But in the era of team science, I've learned that it's not just what skills I have to offer, but what my team as a whole working together has to offer. So the road to my first R01, I wrote my first grant when I first came here as a research assistant professor. That was in 2008. And I admit my first R01 submission was horrible. And it was triage, but not just triage with like really bad scores. And so why? So, I had attended a grant writing workshop. They went through all of the steps, do your specific aims this way, your significance that way. And that helps, but there's a lot that they don't tell you there that can help you get a grant. So things that I didn't do with that first grant was reach out to others beforehand to specifically discuss the specific aims, the ideas for them, and get really honest feedback from colleagues. I didn't work with a team of people who was as invested in the grant as I was. I had a biological collaborator, and I was the computational person. I kind of wrote my parts, and they wrote their parts, and it didn't really end up fitting together real well because we weren't a really strong team, I'd say. I also didn't have a mentor or colleagues read the entire grant before the submission, or It's also good to have example grants to read that were funded by the same study section. Different study sections tend to look at very different things. They bring up concerns about different things, so it's really helpful to know what that study section looks for, which means in the first place you need to have the study section in mind where you want your grant to go to. I don't think I even had a specific study section in mind when I wrote this first grant. And then also I didn't research whether my idea was something that NIH was really interested in funding. So after that grant, I completely started over again. I got a great new collaborator, Laura Rozek, and we really worked as a team, and we brought in other people with that second grant. My second grant got scored with the 30th percentile, not good enough to get funded, but a decent first score. I chose a topic, head and neck cancer, which was something that University of Michigan was strong in because we had the head and neck score. And it was a really nice group of people to work with. And I was able to get a career development award from them before we wrote the grant, which also helped. So Laura Rozek, she was a collaborator who was as invested in getting this first grant as I was. So we really spent a lot of time working on it together. So then we felt like the 30th percentile was good enough that we were going to try again. So we did this. And before that the last submission, we both met with a more senior mentor twice a week for several months, who helped us immensely. I don't think we could have gotten this grant through if not for that mentor. We really tried as well as we could to respond to every reviewer's concern. And there's an element of luck in that because they were concerns that luckily we could address with the resources that we had here, with the skills that we had. And then finally, there was a little bit of luck then when it went back to the study section again. I think we got at least 2 out of the same 3 initial reviewers, and they saw that we had addressed their initial criticism well. And so in the end, then that got a 6th percentile, which pretty much any study section, that's good enough to get funded. Plus, we had the new investigator status, which gives you a little extra bump up. So the grant the budget got cut a fair amount, but everyone said, well, at least we got funded. So I felt like that was a huge success. So since then I've had ups and downs in trying to get NIH funding, but some tips I would give to investigators is that to accept invitations that you get to study sections at NIH. It has a number of different benefits to do that. So you get to meet the other members of that study section and the chair. You get to see what kind of concerns they are bringing up over and over again during the review process, because there are certain things that tend to come up over and over again. So then when you write your grant, you will not make that same mistake. You also get to get a better idea how the successful grants are structured. So, for example, I was still following the recommended page limits from the grant writing workshop that I had attended many years ago. But on a recent study section I was on, I found that the most successful grants had a much longer significance section than expected. So they really took the time to explain that really well. And when it got down to the actual, research approach, that section was quite short compared to what the grant writing workshop recommended. So little things like that, as long as you're paying attention during the study section, you can pick up on things like that and learn what kind of grant topics seem to impress the reviewers the most. And it also gives you a chance to stay up to date on the most novel ideas. I mean, these are the ideas, even before the stage of presenting at a conference. So you're really seeing the most novel ideas in your field. Also, really be collaborative. For my first grant, like I said, I felt like I needed to be the expert in everything for the grant. That's really not the point. You want to build a really strong team with several people. And then write the grant early and take advantage of whatever opportunities your institution has, whether formal or informal, to get other people to read the grant and give feedback. So, for example, here at University of Michigan, MICHR has a program where you do have to give them the grant several weeks ahead of time, but you can give them a rough draft. You could give them just the aims to read if you want. Then they'll meet with you, and they'll give you a very honest opinion back, not just oh, it sounded great, I think this will do fine. But you want somebody who's willing to tell you, when you're really screwing things up. And then overall, like in my kind of research portfolio, I think it's good to have a mix of co-investigator and PI grants. That will help stabilize things through your own ups and downs. If you lose your PI grant, which I have, I still have a few co-investigator grants that really helps to fund people in my lab. So it's kind of not putting all your eggs in one basket. And then finally, take advantage of internal pilot grants. They're really great opportunities for starting new collaborations. And same as the previous advice, don't give up.